say something in your terminal. I don't know. I just like playing with this. I would like the ASCII art. All right. So today we're going to learn about how to get your projects up on the internet, right? It's pretty cool. Has anybody got their projects up on the internet already? Anybody deployed? We're still making the projects? All right. All right. But when you're done, you probably want to like not just be able to have them on your own computer. You want to be able to like host them somewhere, have other people check them out, especially like prospective employers and things like that. So we're going to talk about deploying to Heroku, which is a really nice service for deploying Rails apps particularly. So for the back end, focusing on Heroku. For the front end, I'm going to show a couple different services. I'm going to show GitHub pages and Netlify, both of which are like really easy to use. These are by no means the only deployment services out there, but they're ones that students have had a lot of success with in the past. They're ones like I've used before personally. I think other coaches have used them as well, so we can help out with them. If you go down a different path, we might not be able to help out with those services, so that's it. Has anybody deployed like any personal projects to the internet or like worked with like Heroku or any other kind of, yeah. So can you give me like a rundown of like why we need a service like this, what it does for us?
So like your local host is only tied to your machine. So you can be perfectly fine on your machine, but if you want to share it with the world, you need to host it on some other server that's going to have its own host.
Yeah, the idea is like right now we are running a server on our computer. Like we're basically treating our computer as a server anytime you run Rails server. You're spinning up like a server instance, you're listening for traffic on like localhost port 3000 or whatever port you set it to. But unless you do some kind of like special configuration that, you know, will let the outside world connect to your computer through a secure port or something like that, and you always want to have your laptop running, there's not really a way for you to host your own projects on your laptops. So we rely on these services like Heroku, like AWS, like Firebase, DigitalOcean, all these other providers who have like server racks and server farms and space dedicated that is always listening for traffic, that will always be able to show people your code and run your code and all these different environments. And it's gotten to the point where like configuring these things is pretty easy. So the sample app I'm going to work with today, it should be set up pretty much the way you were instructed to set up your Mod 3 projects. We have a front end in its own repository. It's just a static HTML and JavaScript files. We've got our back end in its own Git repository, which is just a Rails API. We're going to show how to deploy the back end first and then work on the front end. So for the back end, the project we're using is that like kind of Zookeeper app that we played around with when setting up the Rails API. There's a little bit more functionality. It's using this like faker gem to generate all the data, random images based on the species type, which might get a little weird depending on where they're coming from. So try not to go too deep there. Yeah, so to start off, there's a few things that we changed for this project just so I can show a couple other features. I know you're probably like working with gems that are outside of the typical Rails gem, so this might be useful. One thing that's like a really, pretty common use case is like having information that you don't want to push up to GitHub, like you have private API keys, things like that. So to handle that, we're using this .env Rails gem. And what that does is it lets us read from this .env file. It will just hold key value pairs that we can read from. And by including that .env file in our git ignore, like this is no longer tracked by Git. It won't end up on the internet. Nobody else will accidentally see your API keys. So if you have API keys in your backend, like this is a pretty common workflow. So that's one of the gems we added. FastJSON API is just another serializer. It's like a little bit faster than active model serializer. It's not quite as configurable, so your mileage may vary. We use Faker to just like generate data for the seed file. And we're using REST client to talk to this like dark sky API, which is just really to demo the env gem. Other than that, like we just initialized the project with like Rails new API --API using Postgres database. Heroku also works very well with Postgres. I'm not sure if it's a requirement, but it might be to use Postgres as your database. So make sure that's set up before you try any deployments. Yeah, and like right now, we can see like our front end code. Also, it's just like listening for, it's like our API URL is just pointing to localhost 3000. After we deploy to Heroku, we're going to want to change this over to point to the endpoint that Heroku gives us, and we should be good to go. So really, like, a lot of this lecture is going to be me following along a README that somebody else made. Like, we're going to follow along the docs on Heroku, but just to kind of like, it's anytime you're doing something the first time, like deployment, it's a big thing. It can be kind of intimidating, so I just want to break down the steps and make sure it all makes sense and like show you it's actually fairly straightforward. So we can check out the docs on Heroku. I think I've got this open. So this is like the deployment process. We're going to be working with the Heroku CLI application, which you can install using Brew. Anybody used Brew before?
Me.
Gabby has. Gabby, what's Brew?
Brew is like this beautiful thing that I type in my terminal and it does stuff.
Yeah, Brew does stuff. I think the best explanation I heard for it was like Mike Chang said it's the app store for your terminal. It just like lets you download and manage apps really easily. It has like this whole repository of apps you can download. So Heroku is one of them, the Heroku CLI. So as soon as you've installed it, which I already have, next step would be, well, first step will actually be like creating an account on Heroku. So if you go to Heroku.com, sign up. I don't think I have to show anybody how to sign up for a website, right? No. I have to show you? No. Sorry? So you get 5 apps for free. I think there's some limitations in terms of like, if your database gets over a certain size, like 1 million rows or something like that, it will no longer be free.
You get like an enterprise.
Yeah, you can get enterprise plans. I know my last employer, actually, the Tribeca Film Festival, used Heroku to deploy like their actual website, and I know they were definitely paying for it. So it does scale up. Like if you're, yeah.
You use a custom domain name to for ASICs?
Yeah, so if you want to use a custom domain name, I'm fairly sure you can. Like, yeah, DataDads. I haven't done that personally, but I'm like 95% sure that is something you can do. So we won't get into that now. I don't have like a domain that I'm just holding on to show for this lecture, but it's all right. That's all right. Unless you want me to deploy this to DataDads and then just not have it. No. All right. So we got our backend going. I'm just gonna like go through the kind of deployment process for this. So we're going Heroku login. This will prompt you to open the browser and log in if you're not already. Click login. Cool. I'm logged in. It knows that I'm logged in. The services are synchronized. Cool. If I say like Heroku, who am I? You can check, make sure I'm logged in. It knows me. Great. This is my personal email if anybody wants to get in touch. You now have it forever in this recording. Yep. Ian Hollander was taken. Ian Hollander is actually like, he's my nemesis. He was like a self-proclaimed internet guru back in the early 2000s. So he got all the domains, he got all of the handles. It was, yeah. So now I get Ian Holla. Yeah. That's all right. Right. So the next step, right? If we're just following along the Heroku docs, right? We've done the login, right? A lot of the setup is like actually creating the Rails app, which you already have done, so we can skip over that. Like this is, you know how to make a Rails app, you already did it. So I'm gonna skip a lot of this. Specify your Ruby version. This is actually important. So in your gem file, you can say which version of Ruby you want to use. I think by now you should all be on at least Ruby 2.6.1. You can check which versions of Heroku supports, which versions of Ruby Heroku supports, if you're not using like 2.6.1 or anything more recent. But you can also just upgrade your Ruby version. If you're not sure what version of Ruby you're on, you can go to RVM, which is Ruby Version Manager, type in list, and it will tell you which versions of Ruby you have installed and which ones you're currently using. So these are the ones that you have on your machine and you have access to. So I'm on 2.6.1. I have in the gem file for this project specified 2.6.1, so should be good to go for Heroku. The next step is like creating a Git repository for it. I'm sure you've all done that. I've done that for this project. So we're good to go on the Git side. And now we need to create an application, right? So run Heroku create. And this will create an app for us. That's it. Like I have now created an application. I can go to my Heroku account. So now I have this like Quiet Mountain 97210 app that's set up. It doesn't have any information about my project yet. It doesn't know that it's a Ruby project. It's just like a blank space for us to push our code to. But now we have that. All right. Next step, we have to actually. I've got 2 guides open. Terrible. All right. Next up, this is just to like make sure that our Git is connected to our Heroku. Right. So we can check on Git config. See that there's like a Heroku remote for this, like a remote repository for this branch, for this project. Like I could also do git branch, I think -b. Oh, we haven't actually like pushed it up, so it won't know about the upstream branch yet. Right. Cool. So next step, really we're just pushing up our code to Heroku. So should be able to run git push Heroku master. So the remote branches, or the remote repository is Heroku. You usually do git push origin master if you're doing a git push. And origin is typically, when you create a new Git repository on GitHub, that will be the default. All right. No, something went wrong. Okay. I hate when this happens. All right. So no such app as Evening Lake. Oh, all right. I think I know what happened. Let's see. I might have been like messing around with testing this before. And deployed to Heroku already, and then deleted it. So let's see. Let's see how I can solve that. So I want to see if there's like any kind of Git or any like Heroku tracking on this. I'm just gonna go nuclear here. All right. Cool. I just deleted the Git repository on this project. It's no longer being tracked in Git. Need to create a new one. Git init. Create a new Git repository to track this project. Git add our project. All right. Look at all those. Everything. Give it all. Give it all. And let's see. I think I have to delete my Heroku app before I can do anything else. Because you can only have 5 free ones. This is my 4th. So. All right. Delete app. Heroku create. So shielded depths. I'm gonna check. Still seems like it's not working quite right. All right. One other option. I'm gonna try and like just move this to a new directory in case there's like some Heroku configuration in this directory that I'm just not seeing for some reason. So let's see. All right. Remove the Git tracking. Man, debugging during lecture is my favorite thing. Have some coffee. Caffeine. All right. Cool. So I made a new directory for this. I think, is it -A? Zookeeper backend, real Zookeeper. Let's see. Okay, close enough. Okay, so git init. Okay. Clear out my shielded depths. Hmm? I know. Okay. No, I'm still not getting it. Am I missing a step? Am I not following the README? Is that what's happening? Okay, config list Heroku. This should just be saying, yeah, so it should have the, should have this Heroku branch to it. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure this won't work, right? Because when I did the git branch, it didn't find it. Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Hey. All right, cool. Can anybody tell what's happening? Just based on what's going on in my console?
It's fetching an install.
Yeah, it like pushed up my code. It pushed up all the code that I had in my Git repo. What's this step that it's doing? It's running bundle. It's like running bundle install. So it's installing my gems. Right? Cool. And then after we bundle install, with whatever bootsnap is, next up we have to like create our database, right? So we're gonna run Heroku run rakedb migrate. After this is all set up. Ooh, pure escarpment. Somebody Google escarpment. I think it's a hill. It's like a geographical feature of some kind. All right. Yeah. So anytime you want, so we're in our like Git. We're in our project directory that we ran Heroku create on, and it's synced up to our like Heroku remote branch, or Heroku remote repository. So if you want to run like any code on there, you can just use Heroku run and then whatever you would type into terminal. So Heroku run rakedb migrate. This should migrate our database. This will take a little while. All right, and Heroku run. This one has a seed file, so we can seed the database, get some animals in there. Cool. And then if I wanted to check, like how would I check if my database was set up right? Yeah. So Heroku run Rails console, right? Basically, run Rails console. Hrun? Yeah. I don't think so, unless you have an alias for Heroku that's just H. So now we're running IRB, we're running our Rails console on the remote server. So I think it's like animal.all, right? So this works, right? We're able to query the database, get all our animals. And now if I check, I think we can run, so these are the other steps, is like making sure our database is set up correctly. So we're going to run this step, which is basically like setting up space on the server for our Postgres database. A dyno is kind of like a Linux container for this project. If you don't know what that means, it's pretty okay. We'll get into it more in like Mod 5. Have this like infrastructure lecture, talk about DevOps things. So now if I run Heroku open, this should open my project on the internet. Right? We don't have a home page for it, but I think if I go to API v1 animals, right, got our JSON. Yay. Cool. So if I want to get my front end to talk to this remote server, what do I need to do? So check in my index.html. Yeah, so I just need to change the API URL, right? Before it was looking for our local Rails server. Now we want to point it to the remote Rails server. Run refresh, right? It's still working. I can check the network traffic. If I refresh again, oh my god, all these images. And see that it made this GET request to our animals endpoint that is now on Heroku. Oh. All right, cool. So one other thing I want to show you is with that, like, the environment, the .env file, and kind of like setting up environment variables. So we have one endpoint on this server, which is just like fetching the weather from this dark sky API. And you see that it requires this env dark sky API key. So if we try to go to this weather endpoint, so API v1/weather, like we're getting this HTTP 500 error. Does anybody know what a 500 error is? Yeah, it's the server's fault. It's our fault. It's not the user's fault. They didn't do anything wrong. Like, do you have a favorite HTTP status? Dogs. Yeah. So HTTP status dogs. This is a good one. There's like cats and wrappers and a bunch of these. Right. 500 internal server error. Oh. That dog can't run any code. All right, so if we want to fix this, right, like what's the issue? We don't have access to this env file, right? Because we haven't pushed it up. It's in our git ignore. This .env is in our git ignore, so Git's not tracking it, so it wouldn't have been pushed up when we ran that like git push Heroku master. So if we want to get access to that on Heroku, let's see, Heroku Rails env environment variables, right? Cool. So like configuration and config vars. If I didn't know how to do this, Google help out. Awesome. So if we want to manage config vars, right? We can use this Heroku config command. So again, we'll be using like Heroku CLI. Run Heroku config. So these are all the kind of like environment variables that it sets up for us when you run Heroku create. You know, there's like basically saying we're running in production. There's like these like logging options that we can set up. This is our like secret key for the project, and this is like the Postgres URL for the database. So what we want to do is like add a new config var. So we want to add this new like env variable. So if we want to set a config var, we can use this Heroku config set. Right? And this can just be like any key pointing to any value. So I can point like, I don't know, Gabby. What do you want your value to be? Dinosaur. Right? And now if I check Heroku config, we've added another key. This is Gabby pointing to dinosaur. It's going to be very useful in our application. But if I want to get this like dark sky API key in there, right? Just going to copy this. Heroku config set. Cool. So we can check again. Look at our Heroku config. And we see that this dark sky API key now exists. Right? And if I wanted to really like check how this works, like I can go Rails console and just look at like the env at this key of dark sky API key, because that's what we're calling. Yeah, so this is just like on my local machine. So now we have access to it in Rails. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. If I want to run this on Heroku run Rails C. And this takes a little longer because it has to actually connect to the internet and then run Rails console on some server that's probably doesn't have as much, since it's free, not as much like power as my little laptop. So, right, and I want to run env dark sky API key just to make sure that everything's set up. So our server should now have access to this env key. Right? So if I refresh the page, should now have the weather. Yeah. Cool. I'm doing a lot of this through the command line interface, but you can also do it. There's like a nice graphical user interface on their website. So if you don't like messing around in terminal too much, you can also look in settings, reveal config vars, and see those same key value pairs. So personal preference, whatever you like. Heroku's got your back.
So if I want to access
Yeah. All right, go for it.
so if I want to access any of these like config bars, all of them, I would say like ENV, but if I want to back in ENV back.
Yeah, if you want to, it's always just the string. So you, like bracket string interpolation for whatever the name of the key is, and it will give you the value. Were you asking if you want to access them all at once?
No, I'm
or?
saying like so no matter what I put here, like it's ENV, it's not. It doesn't like.
Yeah.
ENV isn't because of like the ENV file anymore. It's just
Mhm.
because that's like what Heroku is calling this like cache. Or whatever.
Yeah, and that I have to get back on like what the exact reason for that is, but I know it's like your basically like I think it's like every system, like Linux-based systems have this idea of like an environment, like so they have environment variables. They're accessible kind of like globally on your computer, and that's why we use like this .env kind of convention. But yeah.
So all you do to deploy from a website, you just take the front end and then send it to like a hosting service. That's where your files are listed, and that one source file is going to be on there as well. And then the fetch request is going to go to the backend. So you need to upload it to your places to launch a website.
Yeah. So the way your question is like how are we going to host the front end basically? Yeah. So based on the way we've set up these projects, there are two separate repositories. Like our front end doesn't know anything about our back end. Like we're not serving the HTML from our Rails server. So we set them up in two different projects. So we'll need to host them separately. You can host static. You can't really host static pages through Heroku. You have to give it some like server to serve the pages. Like that can be a Ruby server or like a Rails server. It could be a Rack server. It could be a Node server. It could be a PHP server. It works with a lot of things. But the two options I'm going to show for like deploying the front end are significantly simpler, with like GitHub pages and Netlify. They're both really good options for serving static content, right? And all of the front end projects that you're making, I'm fairly sure, are static. Like they just have an index.html or like some one HTML endpoint that you're using. And then like you're loading up static assets like the JavaScript files, the any image files, any audio files, things like that. Like you're not making a request to a certain endpoint and then like dynamically rendering things based on that request. It's just like one entry point to serve static files, right? So that's what kind of what we mean when we say like a static site, right? So yeah.
What's not a static site?
So like a Rails app is not a static site. It has like an actual server that has some logic to say, based on a user making a GET request to this endpoint, I'm going to run this code and then return or like respond with this, HTML file or this JSON data or something like that. So those are like dynamic servers. Static is like you have one, like you're really just loading files onto the user's computer. Like they're making a request for this like index.html file by going to an endpoint, and you're just giving them that file back. There's no other like dynamic logic. Right? All the dynamic logic for JavaScript runs on the client's computer. It's not running on the server. If that makes sense. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions about backend before we move to front end? All right. Cool. So our front end is connected to our back end, but we're still just hosting it like really just on the file system. I'm just going to file/user/ all this nonsense /index.html to load this index.html file and all of the JavaScript and other assets associated. But we want to get this on the internet too. So gonna go back to the README, right? So one really easy option is using GitHub pages. And this also works very, obviously very tightly with GitHub. So if you have your project hosted on, or if you have a GitHub repository for your project, this will be a very easy setup. So like for my front end, I have initialized it on Git. We can check. I already pushed it up to a Git repository, a GitHub repository, right? And if I want to get this going on GitHub pages, literally all I have to do, I'm gonna make a new branch off of my master branch. First, I guess I will save my changes, right? Git add, because we've updated the URL to now point to our backend. Right. Cool. Git push. And now I want to create a new branch called GitHub Pages. So git checkout -b gh pages. Right. So we created a new branch. Now we need to push this branch up to GitHub. Right. So we need to tell it to push it. We need to use this like -u flag to set a new upstream origin for it. A new upstream branch for it, like create this GitHub branch on GitHub as well. Right, so git push -u origin GitHub pages. Right, so it's created this new branch on GitHub for us. Refresh the page. I can see I have this GitHub pages branch, and now all I have to do to get this code, the static site hosted, check my settings. I think it's GitHub pages. Right, and because I use this like gh-pages branch, by convention, it will know, hey, you use this like special branch name, I'm gonna make your code available. So like we literally push this up to GitHub, it's now hosted on the internet. Wow. You can make I think you can make a different branch name, and then you just have to tell it like which branch to use for the source. Like if you wanted to use master, then any changes you push to master will also just be deployed on GitHub pages. So that's one option. But yeah, that's like really it for deploying to GitHub pages. Any questions about that? Cool. I'm going to show you one other option, which is becoming more popular, particularly for working with React apps. It's called Netlify. It's another hosting service that's really nice for static sites. So I don't believe you can use it with like a Rails API or anything like that. You would still have to use some other hosting service like Heroku for the back end. But for static front ends, Netlify is really nice. One thing.
Do you use it with like an external API?
Sorry?
Do you use it with an external API? If you were creating an external API as your quote-unquote backend?
Yeah. So if you didn't have your own backend that you were hosting, like if your front end was only communicating with some other external API or something like that, you can use Netlify for your entire project. But really, like the idea is it's for hosting static sites, so it won't work with Rails. Yeah, and what's nice about it is it has this idea of continuous integration, continuous deployment, which is it's a term that comes from DevOps. Basically means like as you're making changes to your app, as you're like pushing your changes to master, those changes are being continuously integrated into the project and then automatically like deployed to all of your users, right? So once you set up this like CI/CD pipeline, it really makes it easier for yourself to just maintain your code and like make changes and have them instantly pushed out to the world. Right. So again, I'm going to use the CLI. You can also use their website to do all of this. Like you can connect your project and give it authorization to your GitHub account, all that through the website. I'm going to use the CLI because that's just how I roll. And I also had some like issues working with the website, so. So to install it, this is not a brew package. This is an NPM package that their CLI tools come in. So just like JSON server, you NPM install globally this Netlify CLI. To log in, run Netlify login. Just like Heroku, this will prompt you to log in. if you're not already. I'm already logged in. If not, it would kick me over to their website, make me like authorize this request, kick me back, and log me in. But I'm already logged in. Cool. So now, in order to initialize this project with Netlify, run this like Netlify init option. Right, and this will run through a few steps. So I want to link this directory to an existing site. No, I want to create and configure a new site. Like this is a new front-end project that I'm hosting on Netlify. Site name, call this like Zookeep. It's a really cool name. All right, yeah, this is my team, absolutely. All right, and then I have to put in my GitHub username and password. Let's see if I can do this without revealing it to the world. Matching sites. Yes. Dang, didn't get it. All right, build command. So when you're doing projects in Mod 4 and Mod 5, or working with like Webpack or any other kind of like build tools, you can use this build command to say when you push the code up, to Netlify, run this code to basically do any steps of bundling and minifying your code for production. It's a bit more of like things to know for Mod 4 and 5. It won't affect too many of your projects here and now. So I'm just going to leave this blank. I don't have any build commands for this project. It's just a HTML file and a JS file. Directory to deploy. This is the current directory. Netlify.toml. So this is like a configuration file that Netlify uses to kind of like save all these settings. So I'm going to say yes, why not? So what this is doing is, again, it's like Heroku, like GitHub Pages, this is tightly integrated to Git for deployment. So now anytime I push my code, I think it will now be on the GitHub Pages branch instead of master, because that's where I Netlify initted, but we'll see. Anytime I push my code to Git, it will also push the same code to Netlify. So again, like continuously updating our code. As we're continuously updating our code, it's also being updated for our users. It's being updated on the web. All right, git push. Open. I might have to be on the master branch for this. Let's see. Cool. So this is like the admin site for it. Let's see what happens when I try to go to the real site. Yeah, okay, so it did it. So this is our site hosted on Netlify. This is our front end. Again, it's like still talking to that same backend URL. If I make this network request, just look at XHR. Like you can see animals. So this is our front end on Netlify talking to our back end on Heroku. And that was it. That was the steps for deploying to Netlify. Cool. All right. So any questions about any of this? You are all now equipped to deploy your projects. Please do it. Like we want to see. We want to share with the world.
Have like a demo and a working live version of every one of your projects that you're going to put on your resume available to employers because they will want to see as an employer.
Yeah, and I'm going to push up the README for this, and that has all of the steps. It has links to the kind of walkthroughs for this as well, in case there's any snags you hit. But as long as you didn't go too crazy and break convention too much, you should be in good shape to deploy. All right. Thanks, everybody.